Hello, everyone. Welcome to the May Coworking IDEA Challenge. My name is Ashley Proctor. I use she, her pronouns. I am a settler on Turtle Island, and I am joining you all today from Seattle, Washington, which is the unceded ancestral territory of the Coast Salish people, more specifically the Suquamish, the Duwamish, Stillaguamish, and the Muckleshoot tribes. And this is where I currently live and work. The Coworking IDEA project, if you're not familiar, is an international collective of coworking operators and associations, community organizers, and collaborative consultants. And we're committed to making the coworking industry more inclusive, more diverse, more equitable, and more accessible. We believe that by working together collaboratively internationally, we can have a ripple effect throughout the industry. And we believe that our actions matter, that we each have an opportunity to make decisions in our own businesses and organizations and in our communities. And we often have the privilege of a platform or access to a larger network that we can influence by changing our behavior and by leading by example. So each month we invite an individual or an organization to challenge us all to take an action, whether it be large or small, in an effort to collectively create the conditions for an inclusive, diverse, equitable, and accessible co-working movement and industry. And that's how we're going to address these enormous tasks of change together and one step at a time. So today I would like to introduce you to Raïsa, who's our guest, and she is our facilitator for May. And I will let her introduce herself and tell you a little bit about her and her work, and then we'll dive into this month's challenge. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Ashley. Hi, everyone. My name is Raïsa Mirza. I also use she, her pronouns. I live and work on the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, which is a culture that has been erased forever and that can never come back because of genocide. I also recognize that the island where I live, which is Newfoundland, or Katakmkut, is the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk. And Newfoundland, which is an island, also has a mainland component called Labrador. And Labrador is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu, of Nitassinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatukavut. I am a designer in systems change and a behavioral designer, photographer, and catalyst. And I've been supporting the Sustainable Development Goals through my work since 2015 when they were ratified by the UN. And previous to that, I also worked on the goals called the Millennium Development Goals that came before the Sustainable Development Goals. So I've been in this work for a very long time now. I currently work as an assistant director with the Communities Building Youth Futures Community Innovation Fund at the Tamarack Institute for Community Engagement, which is an organization that has been supporting community-led innovation and change and collective impact to end poverty in Canada for the last 20 years. And I'm also the founder and principal consultant at WabiSabiJetty, which is a strategic innovation research and design firm dedicated to social change based here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Through my career, I've had the opportunity to work closely with communities in over 20 countries and across the settled lands known as Canada to support many of the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, including no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, affordable energy and clean water and sanitation, and have had the opportunity to see how those goals are really interlinked and how personal institutional changes, even small ones, can really help create change in communities around the world. And I truly believe that through collective action, every person on the planet can thrive. Thank you so much for having me this month.
Yeah, thank you for being with us. And so I guess we'll dive right into this month's challenge. And the challenge is to take action towards the Sustainable Development Goals. We each have organizations and businesses in which we could do this. So maybe you could dive a bit deeper and just explain what the Sustainable Development Goals are and a little bit more about the challenge this month.
Sure, yeah. So in 2015, 193 member states of the United Nations came together. There were 3 years of massive sort of collaboration and consultation, and they all signed committing to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the goals are basically this global, really ambitious plan to eradicate poverty and hunger in all their forms and dimensions across the world. They're urgent, but they're also interlinked targets for our economy, societies, and our biosphere, so our planet. And the Sustainable Development Goals are really a global roadmap with different types of pathways and ways that different organizations, people, governments, and institutions can work together to achieve this goal of a sustainable and just world.
Thank you. I'm getting lost in the goals. I'm actually looking through them all right now. There's just so many layers of depth to them. So we're going to include the link for those who haven't experienced or really gone this far with the Sustainable Development Goals before, so they can explore some of them. Maybe you could talk about a few of them and what we might be able to do as co-working organizations to achieve these goals or help achieve them.
Yeah, absolutely. So each goal actually has specific indicators, so 169 targets in total. And this helps us measure progress on different things. But if we take, for example, I don't know, let's say zero hunger. So in any community that you might be part of as your co-working space or a member, there's likely to be people in your community who are experiencing some form of food insecurity or hunger. And so basically, if you wanted to organize a food drive to support your community organization or your food bank, that could be one. Goal number 14 is life below water. Ashley, you and I happen to live on the coast and near the ocean. And we know that plastic pollution is a real problem for the ocean. Maybe your co-working space can come together and organize a cleanup of your local watershed, whether it's a lake or a river or the ocean in our case. If you think about number 8, I know that a lot of co-working communities are really around providing access to decent work and economic growth. And so many of you might already be attaining or supporting goal number 8 in this case by opening up your co-working space to different people and to different opportunities and collaboration to goals. So those are a few of them, but really I invite you to spend time with the goals and see how you could integrate many of them into your individual and your organizational actions that you take.
That's great. And I through our conversations recently have sort of recognized the overlap in that in our attempts to create inclusive co-working spaces, like you were saying, we are working towards some of these goals around providing decent work and economic growth and innovation and keeping the space inclusive. So there's definitely a lot of overlap there with the IDEA project, with the co-working movement and these goals. So although some of our members and co-working operators might be unfamiliar with these goals, it is so worthwhile to dive in here. I think it really spurs a lot of ideas and really could launch a really interesting conversation with the membership or within alliances, local alliances or regional alliances of co-working operators, of all the things that we could do. And I think that also directly relates to last month's challenge around creating a green event policy for your space to reduce our environmental impact, and the conversations we had around access to clean, to a safe living environment, clean water and air, So all of these things are interrelated. And I think if you dive a little deeper into the goals, you'll see all the different ways we might be able to contribute.
Mhm.
I did want to also address an article that recently came out in Canada, but we'll share it in the post as well, because I think it's worth discussing. So the article is called "These Activists Say That the UN's Leave No One Behind Pledge Promotes Colonialism." And I'm wondering if you wanted to talk about that, or if you'd like me to address it.
Yeah, sure. So, the idea of development in itself is can be argued as a form of colonialism because often the countries that are viewed as being underdeveloped are underdeveloped because of massive historical extraction of resources through colonial powers and through acts, through redefining of boundaries. There's a lot of historical context for that. And so we have the standard where often we're thinking like, oh, like the standard that we need to attain as a country is, the level of Canada or of the U.S. But so the slogan that was used for the SDGs was really "Leave No One Behind," but really what it should be would be to bring everyone to the same equity level, right? And to ensure that everyone is at the same space. And that just because a country has a high socioeconomic standing does not mean that that's necessarily the standard to attain. Many countries have a history of Indigenous-led or locally led, culturally regenerative communities and movements that would have had a lot of these goals in place already before the system came and was disrupted through colonialism. That's one. And the other part is that just because a country is of high economic standing does not mean that they've reached all of the sustainable development goals and that there's no poverty, that there's no hunger. We all know that this is not the case. Each country and community has populations that are left behind. So it's really challenging this idea that people shouldn't be left behind, but really thinking about how do we bring everyone to a level that is good for people and the planet so that we can live together for an equitable future.
Yeah, I think the article brings out all of those points, and thank you for articulating them so clearly for us. It's something that I think we often get hung up on in our activist or advocacy work as well. The language, yes, we have to acknowledge that language is colonial. It frames, as the article says, marginalized people as helpless and in need of this external guidance, but really the focus needs to be on changing those structures which left them behind in the first place. And the language also sort of paints that picture that marginalized groups have accidentally been left behind rather than actually intentionally and structurally excluded. So I think in summary, and again, it's worth reading, we'll link to it in the blog post, but in summary, I think the takeaway is that the pledge's intentions are still very noble. It's just the language that's colonial. And I think we can address that and work on that and also keep the intention in the forefront of our minds and hearts as we're working towards these goals.
Absolutely. And I think the co-working movements, I was looking on your website around some of the goals that you have, and it's really the spirit that you have of doing over saying, of collaboration over competition, and community over agenda makes the co-working community a really great way of achieving the SDGs, because you're this great global movement of really community level networks and people, and you're already seeing, and actually many of you are living the goals to create this. And so it's a great way of really focusing in on what is already happening at the community level and supporting and amplifying the work of people in your communities to be able to work together to achieve the goal. One organization or one person or one business is not going to achieve these goals. They're massive, right? Like ending poverty, like, you know, no gender, like gender equality, no pollution, like all of these things are so, so big. There's just no way that a single or even a group of people can do this. It's really through collective action, through networks, through community change that we'll be able to work on these together.
Yeah, I agree. And I really feel it's great to have goals like this to be able to internationally, you know, come together and do our work in our own ways. And it's also nice to see for me, you know, there are areas of these goals that I just don't have experience with, or I don't have access to those kinds of groups to make that kind of change. But there are some where I really can affect and impact through my businesses and organizations. So it's also comforting to know, you know, I might be working over here, but there are organizations working in this area. We have friends working here, and an entire industry dedicated to eliminating hunger or poverty. And it actually is quite comforting to see them organized in this way, so that for me, knowing that, you know, we're each playing a piece, we each have a role and something that we can contribute to these massive goals. And that's really how we're going to make a difference. So for the challenge, I guess we'll just wrap up with the actual challenge itself. And I see in our blog post this month that you've given people 3 ways that they can help achieve the goals. And then also we have a PDF, which will be attached to the challenge. It's a Google Doc, actually, so people can contribute to it throughout the month of May. And we'll be outlining the different goals and asking folks to list examples or try and come up with ideas of how we might work collaboratively or even in your own community to make progress towards each of these goals. So maybe you could give us some examples of a few of the things we could do in our own communities to start, and we'll help fill out the rest of the list throughout the month.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really believe that every goal can be met somehow, and I would love to see the innovative ways and the ways that you all think about these goals in your own communities, in your own contexts, and the actions that you're taking towards them. The 3 actions that you could take to start off thinking of that conversation. The first one is that 194 countries have signed the Sustainable Development Goals. That means your country is probably a signatory. And that means that there's probably a plan in place for your country, maybe even your province or state, or many municipalities also have plans in place to support how they're going to get through the goal. So your first action is really look to your own community, into your own government, into community sector, and see what they're doing, what is happening to attain the goals, and what are some of the challenges that they have identified as the most important in your own locale, and see if you can link up with them with your space or provide space for that. The second one is I invite you all within your co-working spaces to learn about the Sustainable Development Goals together. We're going to link to the hub, the global hub of the SDGs, and you can really get lost in it. There's so much information, there's so much inspiration of things that are happening around the world. I'm sure that it will be a really great discussion around that with different members of your space. And you can even brainstorm, ways that the companies that maybe you're hosting can try and attain it. So really open, but just as an invitation, like bring the Sustainable Development Goals to your space and to your people. And then the third one, and you're doing this already by participating in the IDEA challenge, is an inclusive co-working space is one way of making the Sustainable Development Goals happen in your work. So for example, maybe by giving access to a range of people to your space, you're actually helping to eliminate poverty, which is goal 1. You're providing decent work and economic growth opportunities, which is goal 8. maybe you're supporting innovation through goal 9. And by keeping your space inclusive of women and other diverse people, you might be supporting goal 5, which is gender equality. So there are lots of ways, and sometimes it's some things that you're already doing and you didn't even know that you're trying it. But I hope that you'll have a really great month just trying to see, oh, like, I'm already doing this. That's great. Keep going.
That's fantastic. And just to start off our shared Google Doc experiment, we'll let everyone have access to make suggestions, and then we'll add them to the list as the month goes on. But for example, goal number 1 is no poverty. And one thing we can do in our spaces is to pay a living wage. So we'll start with that one as an example, but there are many other things we can do to reach towards the goal of no poverty. And so I invite you all to think about it, either prior to or during the conversation with your community. And I guess the final words that I would have for folks diving into this work is really just to remember the intention here is to take these big challenges, these really complex issues, and really we're using a funnel sort of model, and get down to the tiny action, the smallest thing that you can do in your space today, tomorrow, and then every day to really make a difference. So I really want to just reiterate not to be overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge. And as you mentioned already so well, none of us can actually achieve these goals. We're working towards them collaboratively and collectively, internationally over time. But as we know, every small action makes a big difference in the end. And so if we can continue working in that direction, I think we're on the right path as an industry and as a co-working movement. Was there anything else you wanted to wrap up with or address before we go?
No, I don't think so. I really look forward to meeting some of you and hearing about the actions that you're taking this month at the end of the month at the discussion.
Yeah, that's going to be a great conversation. So if you'd like to join us, register for the conversation using the IDEA blog post. There's a link there to register, and we will all be back on the last Wednesday of the month to discuss how your challenge went this month, what your success stories might be, and we'll also collaboratively review the list that we've crowdsourced, and that we can share out all of the different actions we might be able to take in our spaces and in our organizations. So thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure knowing and working with you, and I'm really excited for the rest of the co-working movement to get to meet you at the conversation at the end of the month.
Thanks so much for having me, Ashley.
Great. Take care, everyone.